Lesson 2 is hard. But if you need any help, this video is for you. My name is Kavel, and this covers basically everything I've learned from Drawabox Lesson 2. For those who don't know, Drawabox is a completely free online learning service that can help you learn the fundamentals of art. Drawabox is completely free in the sense that you can access all coursework, complete it, and receive reviews and critiques with no more than an email and a password. If you do want to pay, you can choose to join their Patreon, which will grant you access to credits which are used to get official critiques. Official critiques are in-depth reviews of your work by verified TAs at Drawabox. While the Patreon subscription is monthly, you can opt out and rejoin only when you actually need to submit your lessons. And when compared to other drawing fundamentals courses, Drawabox is cheap, like really cheap. I just want to emphasize on the side that you can do all of this without the Patreon and learn the exact same things as I'm learning right now. I'm in no way sponsored by Drawabox, nor was I requested to make this video. I absolutely love the Drawabox community, and I legitimately believe it is one of the best ways to introduce yourself to the fundamentals of art. I've personally seen my art drastically improve in the first year of Drawabox, and I'm willing to bet that it can help anyone, regardless of if they think they're good at art or not. For those who don't know, I'm Kavel, a new artist looking to learn how to draw from both observation and memory. I stream drawing content nearly every night to help catalog my progress and to encourage others to spend an hour a day doing something that they enjoy. This video exists to help others in Lesson 2 by looking at my official critique and insights that I gained along the way. Now, before we get started, we must acknowledge a very important disclaimer to this video. I am a beginner artist. I am in no way a professional or a definitive source for Lesson 2, Drawabox, or art in general. That being said, please check the description and pinned comments for any corrections for what I've said in the video. I'll be looking in the comments for corrections about what I talk about in the video, and if both myself and others agree, I'll pin them and possibly update the description. With introductions and disclaimers out of the way, let's get into the video. The first homework assignment for Lesson 2 is organic arrows. The core objective of this exercise is to get used to seeing the page as more of a window into 3D space, rather than a flat surface. Initially, this assignment is a tiny bit daunting because you have to make long, curving organic lines while still obeying depth and foreshortening rules. The first critique I received for organic arrows was that I didn't overlap my edges when I should have. Overlapping your arrows is what actually gives depth to our forms. The overlap shown now isn't necessarily bad, but it's avoiding a deeper, more technical problem. My error here was this. Instead of following the original upper line, I curved my bottom line too soon. While the form could definitely exist like this in the real world, I'm ultimately just habitually avoiding putting the correct line underneath. This avoidance typically looks like the arrow is turning around some curve, kind of like a banked racetrack. This simple error can be fixed by drawing our first line and then almost copying the exact same line underneath. While this method abstracts a lot of how these arrows and plane-like 3D structures work, it's great for this assignment. Build a good habit of having control over your current line and not letting other lines, like the top one, distract or manipulate your path. My second critique was that I should experiment more with foreshortening. In pursuit of trying to focus on line work and overlapping my lines, I lost sight of perspective. It's easy to forget that beyond these simple lines, you're trying to make a convincing depiction of an arrow moving through space. My best advice is this. When doing your copied line underneath, make sure to be mindful of its size and perspective. It may be hard to visualize at first, but the curves on the edges should also be used to increase and decrease the relative height of the arrow. Just don't overdo it. The second homework assignment for Lesson 2 is organic forms with contour lines. The core objective of this exercise is to get used to putting organic objects in space and understanding how their contours both construct and describe their relative positions and size. This is a very important assignment for later exercises, and it's a great introduction to mindfully shifting the degrees of ellipses. My first issue in homework 2 was that I had some difficulty conceptualizing where these forms actually exist in space. I couldn't tell how large these actually were or where they were in relation to the other organic forms. Given how awesome the Drawabox Discord is, I got some helpful insights. The most helpful recommendation was this image of a slinky. The slinky image accurately demonstrates how the degree of contour ellipses increase when they get further away and decrease when they get closer. From my experience, a lot like Rich, understanding how these forms behave in space mostly comes with experience. If you get lost like I did, I sadly can only tell you the best way to improve on this is to practice. Take the time to understand when and where to shift the degrees of your ellipses. My first critique for homework 2 was that my forms were a bit too complex, which has a pretty easy fix. The best way to think about sausage forms is, as Uncomfortable describes it, two spheres connected by a uniform tube. The cool thing about spheres is that they're just two 90-degree ellipses at the end of two uniform lines, so for now there's no reason to overcomplicate it. I personally like starting from the back of the sausage form with it facing away from me, then drawing in either direction to finish the form. This allows me to not have my hand covering the form while I draw, and I typically find the inner curve a tiny bit more difficult to draw than the back. My second critique for homework 2 was that my contours were lacking a noticeable shift in degree. This goes back to the same slinky idea from earlier. The closer the ellipse is to the horizon or our general line of sight, the smaller the degree will be. The further away it is, the degree will be larger. Once again, this kinda just comes down to mileage, so practice, practice, practice. Always try to have an idea for how you want your sausage form to move through space. Don't randomly draw ellipses, contours, or even the entire form. Really think about it and try to be mindful of what you're putting on the page. The third homework assignment for lesson 2 is texture analysis. This is a pretty big jump from organic forms and introduces a lot of new, very important concepts. There are two main objectives for this exercise. The first objective of this exercise is to get used to studying our references. The second objective is to have us organize and understand the information we just collected. Ultimately, this homework is the first step into looking at something, breaking it down into its most basic features, shapes, and characteristics, and recreating it on our page in a believable way. In my opinion, texture and detail is the most important part of lesson 2 and is also the most difficult. You're not expected to be a master, flawless, or even understand everything in its entirety. There are plenty of opportunities to grow later down the line, especially in lesson 3 and beyond. All you need to do is try your best, be consistent and patient, and ask for help in the Drawabox Discord if you truly don't understand something. The first issue I had with texture analysis and eventually all texture assignments was over-inking. Over-inking is when you add too much ink to the page for a range of reasons. These reasons include trying to add corrections, not understanding the difference between cast shadows, color, and form shadows, or not being mindful while drawing. The most important insight I can give you guys for over-inking is less is more. Ink is an additive process, and I would wager that you should only use ink to correct things 5% of the time, and even then it's risky. Another solution to this issue is giving yourself the room to choose to add ink later. Uncomfortable goes over this technique in a later lesson.
And so I always start out my shadows and my shadow shapes by outlining them. Then I can decide whether or not I feel it's appropriate to fill them in.
If there is a cast shadow or region of texture that's not explicitly dark, start with a general outline and then choose whether to fill it in later or not. These decisions are final, so give yourself time to think about how adding ink will affect the entire drawing. The fourth homework assignment for lesson 2 is dissections. The previous insight about over-inking also applies to this assignment. The core objective of this exercise is to continue practicing our observational skills. Textures are inherently difficult, especially compared to previous exercises. Remember to be consistent and try your best. It is completely fine if these textures don't turn out perfect. My first critique for homework 4 was that my gradient from light to dark within my textures could have been a bit more gradual. While also a product of over-inking, gradients typically lose their gradual shift when too much time is spent reinforcing the lighter parts of the texture. The best advice to avoid this is, just like the previous insight, give yourself room to choose to add ink later. It's up to personal preference of where you start in the texture, but I personally like starting from the middle and then working outwards. This ensures that the gradient is even and you have a base point to start with. My second critique for homework 4 was that I had a hard time differentiating between color, form shadows, and cast shadows. Most beginners misread color shifts as being texture, or form shadows as being cast shadows. A cast shadow occurs when one form blocks light from hitting another form. A form shadow is the result of a plane that is turned away from the light source. Color is just that, the color of the object. When observing and drawing textures, question what you're looking at. Is it a shadow or is it color? What smaller forms make up this texture and how can I express that correctly? Remember, we should not draw color shifts from the reference onto the page. We should also be using cast shadows to describe the forms on the texture. This exercise is harder than most because it requires mindful attention to what we're putting on the page. Be patient and recognize when you're losing focus or rushing. The fifth homework assignment for lesson 2 is form intersections. The core objective of this exercise is to develop our understanding of how forms exist together in space. This homework was a welcome break from textures, but there was still a lot to learn here. There isn't much to say about this homework, so my best recommendation is to be patient and be ready to experiment. If you're struggling, my best piece of advice is to start with a point. At what point does the form intersect the other? This is completely up to you and determines the relationship between the two objects. Next, decide the dominant form. Consider which form is in front and which one is behind. Finally, knowing the contact point and the dominant form, the next line that you draw is essentially the contour between the forms. Think of it as a line that satisfies the properties of both surfaces. The sixth and final homework assignment for Lesson 2 is organic intersections. The core objective of this exercise is to place organic forms on top of one another such that their weight and placement is consistent and solid. I personally found this homework a tiny bit more difficult than I expected because I'm not used to putting organic forms on top of each other, especially like this. The critique I received for this assignment was in regards to the positioning and weight of my sausage forms. To be honest, I don't have a direct solution for this yet because I'm still slowly figuring it out. My best recommendation is to keep the placement of the sausages simple and to imagine what would happen to the contours of the organic form as it is draped across another. I like to imagine the ellipses before the contour of the organic form, but I'm not sure how valid this method is. I first draw the base organic form. I then imagine the contour ellipses that guide it and then draw the form. You can then draw the contour curves and add the proper shadows. I wouldn't depend on this method, but it at least helped me understand how these sausage forms interact. My final insight, which technically applies to all aspects of Drawabox and drawing in general, is that I found myself getting frustrated and doing a lot of extra pages at the end of Homework 6. A viewer, MuttonChops24, offered a simple comment. They said that I could be burned out and chasing perfection in this assignment, which I definitely was. Given the permanent nature of ink and Drawabox assignments, it's very tempting to believe that every line you make should be perfect. This excessive effort can distract you from the real objectives of these assignments and will eventually burn you out. I would claim there is a hidden objective in this lesson and every lesson in Drawabox, that being getting used to mistakes and pacing yourself. Recognizing when to put the pen down, when to think, and when to put ink on the page is all part of the mindful discipline that builds great artists. While going through this assignment, although you may not be perfect at it, think carefully about your lines and why you're making them. If you feel that you are rushing, unfocused, or putting random scribbles on the page, take a step back. Eventually, these small adjustments will make a huge difference towards how we approach drawing. If you made it this far into the video, congrats, you basically know as much as I do when it comes to Lesson 2. Once again, if you found any issue with the topics in this video, please leave a comment. I want to give a special thanks to MuttonChops24, Optimus, Fonska, Fatima, and to the Drawabox community for helping me with this lesson. I also want to give a super special thanks to Delano and Ryze. They frequently hop into my streams, moderate the channel, and help me with my art. I would not be the artist I am today without these two, and Delano practically helped me kick off the channel. If you're interested in seeing my official critique, joining Drawabox, or any of my other content, everything can be found in the description. I stream nearly every day, so feel free to stop by. Thanks for watching, and best of luck with Lesson 2. Bye for now.